Very good afternoon, all of you. This is Aditi Sharma. I'm assistant professor in Jaipur National University, Jaipur. Today we are going to deal with Vijay Seshadri's poem, Memoir. First of all, let's discuss who Vijay Seshadri is. So, Vijay Seshadri is one of the very prominent postmodern, or what we can call contemporary writers. He is an Indian diaspora to America. Vijay Seshadri, he was born in Bangalore in 1954, and at the age of 5, he moved to America. He is based in Columbus, Ohio these days. Vijay Seshadri is famously known for his poetry collection, that is 3 sections. This poetry collection won Pulitzer Prize for poetry. So, the poems that are there in this poetry collection, it comprises of the philosophical approach of human life, or what we can say a philosophical approach to find out the meaning for the human life. And the poem which we are going to do today is the Memoir. The poem which we are going to do today is on your screens, and the name of the poem is Memoir. As I've already told you, the poem has been published in the poetry collection called 3 sections. The poem is: Orwell says somewhere that there no one ever writes the real story of their life. The real story of a life is the story of its humiliations. If I wrote that story now, radioactive to the end of time, people, I swear, your eyes would fall out. You couldn't peel the gloves fast enough. From your hands, scorched by the firestones of that shame, your poor hands, your poor eyes, to see me weeping in my room, or boring that doll belonged to death. Once I accused the innocent. Once I bowed and prayed to guilty. I still wince at what I once said to a devastated widow. And one October afternoon, under a locust tree, whose blackened pods were falling and making illuminating patterns on the pathway, I was seized by joy, and someone saw me there. And that was the worst of all, decorating, unforgettable.
Vijay Seshadri opens his poem by paraphrasing a very important postmodern writer, that is George Orwell. He writes, Orwell says somewhere that no one ever writes the real story of their life. If we see the title of the poem and first 2 lines of the poem, they are foreshadowing the poem as a memoir or as an idea of real event. It means if we see the title of the poem, we can come to the conclusion that the poem would be an event of real story or an event of the story of real life of the writer or the speaker. But as the poem continues, it comes forward, it comes up with bigger complications as well as multitudes as it grows into. So the poet breaks the poem by bringing in the idea that no human being ever tries to write the real story of his life. He indirectly condemning, he's indirectly, what I can say, defying the idea of the writing of autobiographies, because an autobiography is a real story of human beings' life, and Vijay Seshadri puts up the idea that no one ever tries to write the real story of oneself, of his self. The second line of the poem tries to foreshadow, tries to put forward the idea that the real story of life is the story of its humiliation, which means that the undertone of this line is humans' life as a reality is a collaboration of all the humiliations that he ever faces. Means the idea of human life is suffering. The philosophy of human life is suffering, which has often been projected in Bible also. Although if we go forward with the poem, the poet never confesses throughout the poem, but he brings in certain instances of his life where he has to face humiliations, where he has to be humiliated in his own eyes or in the eyes of someone else, in the sight of someone else. He writes, "If I ever wrote that story now, radioactive to the end of times." He calls his humiliations, the humiliation that he faced in his life, they are the radioactive of the end of the time. Means the intensity of all those incidents, all those instances is like radioactive. People, I swear your eyes would fall out. And the intensity of those, those events has been so much that the eyes of the readers will fall out. I swear your eyes would fall out. You couldn't feel the gloves fast enough. So he is trying to bring in the incredibility of all those events, all those humiliations that he had to face in his life. In the next two lines, wherein the poet is saying that, "From your hands scorched by the firestorms of that shame, your poor hands, your poor eyes, to see me weeping in my room or boring the tall blonde to death." The poet is just trying to highlight the intensity, the incredibility of his humiliations, that if the readers got to know of about those humiliations, the reader would never be able to digest that, would never. They are so harsh, they are so hard, they are so like fire that they will scorch the hands of the readers. So he is trying to possibly he's trying to give the reason that why he has not been admitting those humiliations, because they are so intense, because they are so problematic. They would be so depressing, so problematic for the readers to digest it, to believe upon it. He again says, "Once I accused the innocent, once I bowed and prayed to guilty." So once he has accused the innocent, he has been he has blamed someone who has been innocent, and once he he forgave someone who was guilty. I still wince at once I said what I still wince at what I once said to the devastated widow. So he might once have used some bad words for a devastated widow. He still contemplates upon that. And one October afternoon, under a locust tree, whose blackened pods were falling and making illuminating patterns on the pathway, I was seized by joy, and someone saw me there. So once he was under a tree where someone saw him there, seizing the joy, and that has been the worst moment of his life. All the joy was taken away. So it seems as if the poem begins with so much, but it doesn't have much to say, doesn't contains anything much inside it. But the poem ends with pain, where poet is happy, but someone sees him there, and all of his happiness fades away. All of his happiness goes away, and that moment becomes unforgettable for him. He is not able to forget that pain. Therefore, what I have analyzed from this is the poet is trying to bring forward the idea that the happy moments of life are something which fades away with time, which fades away with the expectations that a person has after getting something, the expectation of getting something better than that. But the humiliations, the sufferings, and the pains that a person has never goes out of his mind. They are unforgettable to his mind. So this is what this poem has been all about.